Hey friends, I'm at school again today, as you can see. I told you guys that I would be. Now, I've got a special surprise for you I'm going to show you. I've been working, oh, excuse my hair, I'm a mess. Been packing up the classroom all day with Gracie, and we're all finished, and I thought that you might like to see the classroom all packed up for summertime. One last time, here we go. I'll turn my camera so you can see it. So here it is. We've got everything packed up. Everything's in the closet. All the books are put away. And the room is ready for the custodians to come in and clean. And we'll be all ready to come back to school next year. Now I want to stop right here real quick. This is my family picture wall. And I want to tell all of you that we maybe didn't get to have our class picture, but Miss Hallett got one good shot of all of you together one day. I don't know if you guys remember that, but I got you all together on the carpet one day. I think Miss Parks had something she had to attend to down in the office, and I had you all together for a little bit. And so I said, I'm taking a picture. So even though we didn't get our class picture this year, I'm going to be putting all that together, and I'm still going to have it, and I'm going to put you on my family wall, because even though we didn't get to finish out our year together this year, you guys are forever my family. Once you're my kids, you're always my kids. And I'm a little bit, I can feel a little emotion in my heart right now, even thinking about all of our good times we had in this classroom this year. So I just thought you guys might like to see it, and I hope that you all always remember your third grade year, that we had a lot of laughter and a lot of fun, a lot of good stories, and not that we had to end on such a weird note. So I wanted to take that moment to talk to you about that and tell you how much I love all of you. Now, I also have a chapter to read for our read aloud today. And I'm still going to be doing the read alouds till the end of the school year. Just because I've got the room packed up does not mean that our year is done. We're going to continue our virtual home learning. And but I just thought you guys might like to see this. So I'll be back working from home again after this one. So let me set the camera up so I can read to you. I've made myself a little prop with our old beach sign that we used to have over by the printer, and I'm gonna fix it so it'll hold the camera while I read to you. One last time this school year, your third grade year, you're all gonna be Tallvillians next year. I know you're all probably super excited about that, and I can't wait to see you all coming down the hall and giving me hugs next year on your way to Tallville. And I'm going to be so proud of all of you. And I know you're going to have a wonderful year next year in Tallville. So this is our last moments in our classroom together for the year. I would have been emotional even if you were here, so not to worry. It's not just because you can't be with me. Because I love you guys so much. And that will never change, and you got to always come and see me. All right, now, The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. Chapter 18 today. Now, when last we left off, Edward had been taken from an old lady by Bryce and taken to his sweet little sister, Sarah Ruth. And sadly, we found out that poor little Sarah Ruth is very, very ill. And she has had a rough time, and she's barely 4 years old. And she can't even get out more than one word because she has such a terrible cough, which could mean a variety of different illnesses that she may have had along, back in the day when this book takes place. And she's a special little girl, and Edward recognizes that right away. And we see that it talks about that there's a moment in that chapter where Sarah Ruth holds him like a baby. And she holds him so gently and fiercely at the same time with such an enormous amount of love. He's never felt anything like that before. and it said that he felt like his body flooded with warmth. He was just overwhelmed with emotion. You could tell he was falling in love with this sweet little girl. So that was a really important part of our story in our last chapter. We also heard that he was there to replace a doll that someone, we're not sure who the someone is, but he had broken when he was drunk. So I wonder if we're going to find out more about that today. Now, grab your papers and pencils so you can get ready to jot your thoughts while you're listening to today's chapter. While you're listening, I want you to listen for, how does Edward feel about Sarah Ruth? Don't just tell me he loves her. Don't just tell me he likes her. I want you to listen for a specific spot, and I want you to explain to me how it says that Edward feels about Sarah Ruth, because it's very important and specific. And what do you think? There's a spot in the end where they're wishing on a star, and it tells us that Edward wishes on Sarah Ruth's star. What do you think that Edward wished for? Based on the events happening in the story, what do you think that Edward would wish for at that moment in his life? All right, here we go. Chapter 18. Grab your papers, pencils. Get ready to jot your thoughts. Bryce and Sarah Ruth had a father. Early the next morning, when the light was gray and uncertain, Sarah Ruth was sitting up in bed, coughing, and the father came home. He picked Edward up by one of his ears and said, "I ain't never." "It's a baby doll," said Bryce. "Don't look like no baby doll to me." Edward, hanging by one ear, was frightened. This, he was certain, was the man who crushed the heads of China dolls. "Jangles, Jangles," said Sarah Ruth between coughs. She held out her arms. "He's hers," said Bryce. "He belongs to her." The father dropped Edward on the bed, and Bryce picked up the rabbit and handed him to Sarah Ruth. "It don't matter anyway," said the father. "It don't make no difference, none of it." "It does matter," said Bryce. "Don't you sass me," said the father. He raised his hand and he slapped Bryce across the mouth. And then he turned and left the house. "You ain't got to worry about him," said Bryce to Edward. "He ain't nothing but a bully. And besides, he don't hardly ever come home." Fortunately, the father did not come back that day. Bryce went out to work, and Sarah Ruth spent the day in bed, holding Edward in her lap and playing with a box filled with buttons. "Pretty," she said to Edward as she lined up the buttons on the bed and arranged them in different patterns. Sometimes when a coughing fit was particularly bad, she squeezed Edward so tight that he was afraid he would crack in two. Also, in between cough fits, she took to sucking on one or the other of Edward's ears. Now, normally, Edward would have found that intrusive, clingy behavior of this sort very annoying. You probably remember he used to say he didn't like being hugged so tight because it would wrinkle his clothing. But he's a different rabbit now, isn't he? But there was something about Sarah Ruth. He wanted to take care of her. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to do more for her. At the end of the day, Bryce returned with a biscuit for Sarah Ruth and a ball of twine for Edward. Sarah Ruth held the biscuit in both hands and took small, tentative bites. "You eat that all up, honey. Let me hold Jangles," said Bryce. "Him and me got a surprise for you." Bryce took Edward off in the corner of the room, and with his pocket knife, he cut off lengths of twine and tied them to Edward's arms and feet, and then tied the twine to sticks of wood. "See, all day I've been thinking about it," Bryce said. "What we're going to do is make you dance. Sarah Ruth loves dancing. My mama used to hold on to her and dance her around the room." "You eating that biscuit?" Bryce called out to Sarah Ruth. "Uh-huh," said Sarah Ruth. "You hold on, honey. We got a surprise for you." Bryce stood up. "Close your eyes," he told her. He took Edward over to the bed and said, "Okay, you can open them now." Sarah Ruth opened her eyes. "Dance, Jangles," said Bryce. And then, moving the strings with the sticks with his one hand, Bryce made Edward dance and drop and sway. And the whole while, at the same time, with his other hand, he held on to the harmonica and played a bright and lively tune. Sarah Ruth laughed, and she laughed until she started to cough. And then Bryce laid Edward down and took Sarah Ruth in his lap and rocked her and rubbed her back. "You want some fresh air?" he asked her. "Let's get you out of this nasty old air, huh?" Bryce carried his sister outside. He left Edward lying on the bed and the rabbit staring up at the smoke-stained ceiling. Thought again about having wings. If he had 'em, he thought, he'd fly high above the world to where the air was clear and sweet, and he'd take Sarah Ruth with him. He'd carry her in his arms, surely so high above the world she'd be able to breathe without coughing. After a minute, Bryce came back inside, still carrying Sarah Ruth. "She wants you too," he said. "Jangles," said Sarah Ruth. She held out her arms. So Bryce held Sarah Ruth, and Sarah Ruth held Edward, and the three of them stood outside. Bryce said, "You got to look for falling stars. Them are the magic ones." They were quiet for a long time, and all three of them looking up at the sky. Sarah Ruth stopped coughing. Edward thought that maybe she had fallen asleep. "There," she said, and she pointed to a star streaking through the night sky. "Make a wish, honey," Bryce said, his voice high and tight. "That's your star. You make you wish for anything you want." And even though it was Sarah Ruth's star, Edward wished on it too. So, that's the end of our chapter for today. That's the end of chapter 18 and our last chapter that we'll read together in our classroom for your third grade year. You guys have gotten so big. I'm so proud of every one of you. You've grown so much this year. Now remember, the two answers I want from you today. How does Edward feel about Sarah Ruth? Don't just tell me happy or he loves her. Tell me how he feels. There was a certain part in there where I read about that. And what do you think, based on the things that are happening in the story right now, what do you think Edward wished for on Sarah Ruth's star? That's the end of today. I love you guys so much. I'll see you again on Monday, and I hope you enjoy your weekend. Bye.